We appreciate the opportunity to have Linda Harvey with us today, as well as Tom, the chauffeur, and as well as Tom, the love of her life. How's that? Who's also her husband. Maybe I should add that too. Just cover the bases. Anyway, we're glad you're with us today, and certainly want to invite Linda to come up now. Linda, we're grateful that you're here, grateful for the opportunity to learn more about the subject matter at hand. And as a church, we are not a political organization. This is not a political rally. We're more interested in promoting what we're for, faith and a biblical worldview, as opposed to what or who we're against. We just have no interest in that at all. And, we've talked about that a number of different ways, and we look forward to helping people understand that as people who have convictions about God and family, how can we do best to pass that on to that next generation? And that's our prayer for you.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for coming. This is a really nice crowd. I'm so excited that you're here. I want to thank the church, Marysville Christian, for hosting this and allowing this information to be shared. And I want to start by let's just open with a prayer. Is that okay? Heavenly Father, thank you so much for bringing people together this afternoon to explore some of the challenges in our culture. And I pray that you have brought just the right people here for the right reasons. You know what's on everyone's heart. You know what people need to hear. I pray you will give me the information you want me to transmit. I pray that this will be the beginning of an empowered and lovely gospel-centered action of outreach, and I believe that we can do that. We have so much because we have you, and we just ask that you to bless this time together, and we pray this in the name of Jesus. Amen. So what I've entitled this, it's We the Parents, was one big title here, but also empowering families to navigate our culture. And let me start out by telling you about why I'm doing this and how I approached this particular ministry. I am founder and president of Mission America, and that's missionamerica.com. If you're at all interested in any of these issues, I urge you to go to that website. We were founded in 1995, so there's not all the articles go back that far. I've had to cull some down, but we continue to post things. And yes, we do get somewhat political. Mostly it's about issues and policies relating to schools and youth and families and Christian religious freedom. And so I'm also on the board of Protect Ohio Children, and you will see I have my book out there that I've written called Maybe He's Not Gay, Another View on Homosexuality. But also next to that are free buttons, Protect Ohio Children and Stop Indoctrination in Schools. They're free, and information about that organization, which is a different network of people that have been reporting on and monitoring and looking at what's going on in the schools. I'm also a radio talk show host. If you listen to Bob Burney or any of the shows on thewordcolumbus.com, 880 AM, which goes all over the state, 104.5 FM. I'm on there from 1 to 1:30 on Saturday afternoons and just after the 4 o'clock hour on Tuesdays and Thursdays for a commentary. So you'll get an extra dose of some of this if you want to tune in there. So as I said, we started in 1995, and at that time I was a new believer in the Lord Jesus Christ. I had been, at that time I would call it a liberal. Now it would be called a progressive agnostic, and much longer, extremely thrilling story. Not at all, it's very boring, but for me it's thrilling, but for other people, about how that happened in the progression. But I told a little bit of it this morning in this Sunday school class. But anyway, so after my eyes were opened, I'm going, oh my goodness, this is things are not good in America when you look at it from a Christian worldview, that was in the early 90s. And I'm sure some of you hearken back to that time, and you're probably with me going, yes, well, right now, doesn't it seem like things are just popping like crazy? It's like you can't keep up with all of the things going on, and how many of them are going to influence our children. Wow. I mean, it's unbelievable. So I became motivated to try to make a difference. I left my profession. I was a teacher in the first part of my career, but then I went into public relations and advertising and marketing. And so I thought I wanted to stay home with my children. So then God put on my heart, well, you're staying home with your children. Why don't you start an organization to use communication skills to try to do something about this new worldview you have compared with the Christian worldview, your new Christian worldview compared to the secular worldview you had had previously. So that was my goal. And so I've become basically a writer, reporter, and monitor of, and a kind of a media person in a small, way for what's going on in the culture. And so let's have the next slide. So let's start out by, we're going to focus mainly on the schools, and I'm going to cover some things in depth. I hope you are ready for some sort of drinking from a fire hose here, because I can't do justice to all these subjects, but these are some of the main subjects that I have been covering. But let's start out first with how we even approach the idea of raising our children to begin with. From a Christian standpoint, we learn in Scripture that we have obligations as parents. We don't simply, when I was again, a secular agnostic, I thought, oh, well, everybody you just go and you enroll your children in the public schools because that's what you're supposed to do. When you read Scripture, you realize, no, there's a bigger picture here. God has entrusted every single person with children for a time, stewardship. They are not ours, they are His, ultimately. But we have certain obligations, and the education of the school is something we look at sort of, I would say globally in a way, but universally, in that we're not obligated to put our children in the public schools, okay? We're not obligated to a certain type of schooling. We are obligated to train them and think about that. So as I've said on this slide, we are obligated to take care of them, the basics, being safe, fed, housed, educated, and then we choose that education carefully. But probably the primary goal we have is to lead them as much as we can to faith in the Lord. So if anything's going to conflict with that when we've chosen the education, that is where we should be going, wait a minute, I either have to speak up and change this environment that I put them in, public school, religious school, private school, or I have to back off of that because we cannot have them corrupted morally in the school system, in a school setting, and we have a voice in America, so we can make a difference there. And we also want them to be safe physically at school, safe morally at school. We want the school to stay in its lane. That is, academics, can we just have academics, please? And not that values haven't been formed all along the way when we were all growing up. When you think about values are shaped at school to some extent, but it's usually through strong academics in the literature lessons, in history lessons that are valid and not manufactured, and so on. They should not, children, we have some expectations here. They should not be guinea pigs for therapy experiments. The school should not try to replace us as parents in our role, correct? So, and then we should be able to expect that when we send kids to school, they're not taught things that undermine their personal stability, that undermine family relationships, nor are seditious leading them to become revolutionaries in the country where we are all safe and have liberty. And we have much to be grateful for what's going on in America. So we have some basic expectations. I don't think that's too much to ask. So let me be eager to say here before we talk much about the schools, is that I don't want this to be bashing. I am trying to alert you to what's going on. We didn't invent this. This is just reporting on what's happening. In the schools, we have many, many fine teachers and administrators who are holding on, sometimes with bare knuckles, in a very troubling and difficult environment. And they're often the only thing holding things together in some schools, is courageous teachers who still want to stay in their lane, do the right thing, and teachers of faith, and staff, school staff who have faith and are transmitting great values and working for our kids, and administrators. The problem is we have more and more open, activist, radical teachers, and then those who are willing to allow them because they don't have great principles of any kind. So the radicals are getting a foothold, and we have to confront this. Next slide. So here's what we'll be covering today. And we're going to run through these things relatively quickly, and I want to make sure you know, I don't think I see any children. I think the children are off. Some of this gets a little graphic quickly. We do it and then move on, but just you need to know some of these things, and I hope that's okay with everybody. We're going to talk about sex education, the different types of sex education in Ohio and nationally, what you should be looking for, diversity, equity, and inclusion. That term is all of a sudden in the last couple of years everywhere in the school systems. What does it mean? We're going to talk about the LGBTQ, quote unquote, agenda, homosexuality, gender confusion. Is this all about born that way safety, or is it immorality? What does God's worldview, the Christian worldview, say about that? Social emotional learning is one of the latest buzzwords, and it is coming on like a storm, extremely well funded. We need to find out and be up on that. And then we'll talk a little bit about critical race theory influenced lessons. Is this a new civil rights movement? Should we all be saying, great, just like Martin Luther King, or is it quite a bit different? And is it true that there is no CRT in schools? I don't know if you've heard that narrative, but that's out there it has been quite popular. So we'll talk about all that. So let's start talking about sex education. Okay, there are two basic types of sex education you need to watch for. One is abstinence until marriage focused sex education. The other is comprehensive sex education. And this is where it gets a little confusing, because comprehensive sex education sounds wonderful. It sounds comprehensive. Well, the problem is it's comprehensive of some things and leaves out some other things, like the risk factors, the reality about the risk factors. So in Ohio, we have a law that mandates that sex education shall emphasize abstinence until marriage. I don't know if you know that. Raise your hand if you know that. If you know, probably not. Okay. We've had it since 1999. And this is because this is where the research shows you the best outcomes for children are. That law was enhanced a year and a half ago down at the Ohio State House, and now the schools have to report if they're going to teach anything else like comprehensive sex education, and they have to get an opt-in permission from parents. So the thing that you want to ask is, why are so many schools teaching comprehensive sex education, which is not abstinence focused? Good question. Columbus City Schools has a contract through Nationwide Children's Hospital with the federal government to teach a Planned Parenthood program, developed program called Get Real, and it's in all 12. I think they have 12 middle schools, and starting in 7th grade. And so keep 7th grade in mind when I tell you a little bit about what. Let's do the next slide. Comprehensive sex education is all about. Now, this is not what they'll tell you. This is my digested version after studying this for 25 years. And it began to be called comprehensive sex education about 15, 18 years ago, and definitely separate in the two camps. They will mention abstinence, but it's only one of many choices you have. And the real goal, when you boil it down and you start looking at the curricula, is to get teens to feel comfortable going ahead when they're ready, going ahead and having sex. And they can manage this as long as you consent, as long as you have condoms, as long as you have contraceptives. You're fine. I mean, yes, there's a little risk. Yes, maybe a relationship. Yes, maybe sexually transmitted infections, but we're not going to spend a lot of time on that because we don't want to discourage you from doing what you have a right to do. And increasingly, it's also about sexual rights. And that includes, of course, advocating all of the many different kinds of sexual identities that are out there. Being homosexual, the latest ones are non-binary, gender fluid, gender queer, and then all the different variations of gender confusion. It's extremely sad that we watch our kids going through this. Well, that influence is heavy now into the comprehensive sex education curricula. Planned Parenthood and abortion clinics are very friendly with all this, and parents are. If you want to tell your parents, fine, but if you want to keep all this from your parents, that's your right to do. You have a right to privacy. So we're going to teach you about how to go down to where the closest clinic is, how to go to CVS or Walgreens and buy condoms if you need them. And then we're going to teach you in mixed sex classes, boys and girls together, how to take an anatomically correct part of the male anatomy and practice putting on a condom. And we're also going to make sure that you know that condoms are to be used not just for vaginal sex, but for anal and oral sex as well, starting in 7th or 8th grade. Does this sound like something that's healthy, beneficial, moral, lines up with a Christian worldview? It absolutely does not. Now, the good news for people who have children in Marysville schools, I believe, if anybody has different, more current information, please let me know. But that Marysville has been teaching abstinence and has been contracting with one of the really, really fine abstinence educators in the state until, of course, then we had COVID, and then nobody did any of this for a while. And then they have not been able to find a teacher, that particular group. So I'm not sure what Marysville's teaching now. They may still be teaching abstinence on their own. I don't know. If anybody gets information, let me know. But that was just a few years ago. So the motivation was in the right place. There are lots and lots of schools in Ohio that do teach the abstinence until marriage version. So one of the things that's happened, next slide please, we've had the pressure from the LGBTQ activist community over the last 15, 20 years to transform sex education and comprehensive sex ed, okay? And what they've done is they have put their own spin on this. That's why it's become increasingly what I would call emphasizing non-procreative sex acts, because that's what people involved in homosexuality often will do. So that's the emphasis on condoms is because condoms are a tool of promiscuity. I mean, think about it. You have one in your wallet, supposedly. That's what they'll tell people. And this is the homosexual community, unfortunately, or at least they want that right to be. And when you're not worried about pregnancy, how low can the age be when children start being sexually active? There are some people that think that children should be sexually active with each other, on their own, or even with an adult. And that's their right to choose that. There is a move going on to sexualize children, and you've seen parts of it have been reported all over the place. that is coming from a place of great radicalism. Certainly not all of the people that would call themselves progressives agree with that. However, there's a segment in that party and within the LGBTQ and pro-abortion community thinks it's just fine for children to go ahead and be sexual. So we have to watch carefully for any remnants of that. So I will come back to the issue of homosexuality, gender confusion later. So let's move on, and we're going to talk now about social emotional learning. So let's go to the next. So this is the framework that is being taught in so many schools now and is being adopted. And at first you're going to think, oh, this sounds a little boring and so on. This becomes very critical to know about because it's becoming, in many schools, the new air that the school breathes, part of their mission statement. And it is the doorway into which all kinds of therapy is happening for whole classes, what would be called therapy, lots of counseling. There's big money behind SEL. The Biden administration's American Rescue Plan had gazillion dollars, let's just put it that way, to put social workers and counselors in schools all over the country. Part of it was COVID relief to bring schools back online and to address stress and anxiety issues. And of course, there are and were some of those. But you can't help but see that this was already underway before COVID, and the move toward social emotional learning and all the agendas that plug in there quite well. And all of a sudden, you've got all this money. Governor DeWine, who loves, for some reason, the education bureaucracy, has just authorized a whole array of new counseling positions throughout the state. And so you have, again, so many more counselors and social workers being hired in schools. So I ask you to watch for that. Just to give you the basics, SEL, the basic social emotional learning, there's a whole array of vendors out there and consultants. It has created a whole new consultancy and vendor class, and they love selling stuff to the schools, right? Well, there's 5 basic competencies, that's how they put it, of SEL. One is self-awareness, then there's self-management, social awareness, relationship skills, and responsible decision-making. So a lot of parents see this and go, oh, I'd like to have a more responsible kid. Oh, I'd like one that was a little bit more self-aware and could manage himself a little better, maybe anger management and stress management. The problem is again, this is not the school's purview. Can we have the next slide? So what's happening is that starting at the highest level in Ohio in 2019, the Ohio Board of Education adopted a strategic plan addressing the whole child. And you will see that phrase everywhere in education right now, the whole child. Now, make sure you understand that when the Ohio State Board of Education and then their administrative arm, which is the Department of Education down at Front and Broad Streets, I think it is. When they adopt something, it doesn't necessarily, unless the legislature mandates it, means that every school system has to do this. So Ohio is a locally controlled state as far as many things go. However, lots of schools already were on board with SEL, and they have gone ahead and done this. So if you go down to the Ohio Department of Education, or you go to the Ohio Department of Education website and look at under SEL, you'll see all of this laid out here. So I did a little testimony down at the Ohio Board of Education about 9 months ago, and I just said, they did this a few years ago, and they're all looking at me like, nobody's ever, how dare you say, but I'm saying, and I tried to do it in a really nice voice, okay? Try to be too confrontational, but do you guys really have a right to the whole child? I mean, think about that. Parents have legal custody of children until they're 18. You feed them, you clothe them, you educate them, you house them. You wipe their runny noses and all the other things parents do. Schools, again, have one job. It's academics. Stay in your lane. Stop trying to be the global parent for all of our children. Okay? So there is so much more move to do this, and part of it is understandable because families are a mess in many families. Kids are showing up at school and they're reflecting the family chaos that's out there. And then we had COVID and all of that and the shutdowns. So you can understand some of that. But the problem is this opens the door to amateur psychology by some of these classroom teachers, data collection and assessments of what kind of thing your child is doing. And then those assessments sometimes stay in a file. One girl in, I think it was Maryland, had a very brief encounter with a social worker, and they thought she acted like she was obsessive compulsive. That went in her file, and it followed her until she was having trouble getting into colleges. Her family filed a lawsuit about this. That is one of the beginning things of times of SEL. That's like 5 years ago. So that's the kind of thing that can happen. Data collection. The other thing is the worldview of SEL is not friendly to Judeo-Christian values. They love indigenous faith, they love neo-pagan faith, and so when they're going through some of these, when it gets down to the nitty-gritty and they're talking about self-awareness and relationship skills and social awareness, social awareness may take people into all kinds of other ethnic groups and religions. Again, Christianity gets the short shrift, not a lot of attention devoted to that. One of the other things that we found is that other kinds of spirituality are showing up in the classroom under SEL. One big one is called mindfulness meditation. This is a stress reduction, they say, behavioral management strategy. Well, it is showing up in a whole array of schools in Ohio. There was a number of schools in northern Ohio that were all of a sudden having mindfulness meditation sessions in their kids' classrooms, where the kids sit down, again, on the little mat, hands like this, which is Eastern faith, Buddhism. Close your eyes, calm, learn breathing exercises. Maybe you repeat a phrase, it's like a mantra. The Hahn Foundation, Goldie Hawn, she's big on, she wants to get this in every school. We've had some politicians that have also wanted to put this in schools. And so many pastors in northern Ohio, Mansfield area and all Ashland, got together and said, we're going to, and their congregations, we're going to go to these school boards. And no, this is spirituality. You can say it's stress management. You can say it's not spiritual. It's spiritual. So you have to watch this stuff. This is what I'm saying. It might be not that bad, but it might also turn out to be quite intrusive in your child's daily life. For instance, Panorama is one of the big vendors of SEL. And there's lots of surveys and questionnaires that go on with SEL. One of the things that Panorama recommends is that the kids check in every morning. So they have their little iPads, most of them. You go to your iPad, how are you feeling today? Well, I looked through some of the questions that you can adopt for your school and that your classroom can do. And some of them are like, how are you feeling today? Did you have a good day? Is there anything you'd like to talk with a trusted adult about today? And they're at school, so what are they going to do? Say, I'm going to go back home and talk to my mom. No, they're hoping that you'll talk to someone at the school. So it gets very intrusive and it becomes amateur psychology. So I'm going to take a little quick detour because, as I've said, this is not the school's role. What the school needs to do is stay with academics. One of the rationales for SEL is that kids are coming to school and they're not ready to learn. Kids need to be ready to learn. That's in the Ohio State strategic plan about what they have all this SEL language. Well, does this make them ready to learn? Or isn't that the parent's job? Again, you're going outside your lane. One of the things we've been doing at Protect Ohio Children, so that's where I'm on the board. That is not my organization, but I'm on their board, is that we monitor a lot of these issues, the comprehensive sex education, SEL, the critical race theory, which I'm going to talk about. and also started a recent project called the Academic Accountability Project, where we are taking data and trying to make a very simple graph for school systems. So we haven't done all the school systems in Ohio yet, and just let people see where they are on English language proficiency, science proficiency, and math. So here's Marysville. I don't know if you can see this. Okay. Everybody, all over the country, school systems took a dive during 21, 22 as a result of the close downs in 2020. Can you see that all? All right, yeah. Okay, so, and now they're climbing back up. So I'm looking at this, and I just want you to know Marysville's not doing too bad. This isn't bad compared to other school systems. There's room for improvement, but it's not too bad. I've seen way worse. So, but we need to keep them there and continue to work on the improvement and not go off into these other tangents, which are time wasting, money consuming. Is there a tax levy for your school district now, this time for Marysville? There is in Upper Arlington, where I am. We don't need all the money being spent on all this as well. And do we need to accept every grant that's out there that the federal government and the state offers us? I don't think so. But anyway, so here's the assessment that one group that has been looking heavily at social emotional learning around the country. It's a group called Courage is a Habit. And this is rather cynical, but I think this is important to look at because the heavy-duty school systems involved in this kind of fit this bill. So let's go to the next slide. This is their view of what SEL is all about. You don't want your school system going down there. You want them to work on academics. SEL is a revenue-generating, psychologically manipulative scam. When schools tell you it's evidence-based, it is based upon fraudulent data by woke organizations that sell SEL. There's big money in here. Okay. When schools tell you SEL increases graduation rate, they're lying. It simply means they're graduating students who are illiterate. When schools tell you that SEL improves behavior, they're lying. It simply means that they are no longer reporting or punishing inappropriate behavior. Now, that may be really harsh, but I think this is worth paying attention to, that may be going on. So what are some of the kind of tools that SEL uses? You may be having trouble focusing. How does this come down to a lesson in class? So let's have the next slide. So there's, for instance, this has been, I've seen this in a Dublin teacher's elementary classroom. My Magical Words, and it's a whole series of books. And again, it comes into sort of heavy-duty self-esteem, the power of positive self-talk. The words you have superpowers. Well, we all want our kids to feel confidence, but is this a biblical worldview? It becomes very, very, very me-centered. And then you go on and you look at the other pictures in here, and you see one of, again, I am peaceful, and a girl meditating, not praying, it's the meditation, normalizing that behavior, making that seem like that's the norm for kids. And if there was a balance, at least a balance with a Judeo-Christian worldview, that would be okay, but it doesn't seem to be there. So, as I said, SEL, some of the other tools that are used for SEL in the schools, how this is worked out in the school, involves questionnaires, sometimes all-class surveys, sometimes these check-in times. And one of the things that's happening is they're responding to, there's a high suicide rate among our kids now, okay? I see some of the things going on, and some of the agendas being pushed in our schools, I think are contributing to this. We'll talk a little bit more about that when we get to the LGBTQ stuff and the some of the, and I already talked about the sex ed. If you're a girl and you go through comprehensive sex ed and you get the feeling that in order to go forward into womanhood, you have to basically become a porn star. It's no wonder that some girls think, I would just like to retreat to childhood. Maybe I'll be a boy. I think that's what may be going on with some of our kids, or it gets worse. It becomes suicidal. Okay, so you have questionnaires. On the questionnaires, they're asking kids all over the place, have you ever given thought to suicide? Have you made a plan for suicide? What used to happen in the schools is when you perceived that a child was troubled, you intervened with that child. To blanket every child with this, what you're risking, and I fear is happening, is introducing troubling concepts to children, ideation about suicide that they really weren't even thinking about, and other things. So, next slide then. The SEL opens the door to many agendas, these competencies. Okay, let me give you a couple of examples. The Ohio State Department of Education's website has standards that may or may not have been adopted, but something like that, with the school is heavy duty into SEL, they will have standards. One on self-awareness for high school says this: analyze why current events may trigger an emotional reaction and identify ways to regulate a response. So this is activism. This is going to get them right into some kind of training for activism. Self-management in middle school. Apply productive self-monitoring strategies to reframe thoughts and behaviors. Is it the school's job to reframe kids' thoughts and behaviors? You may have a kid with anger management problems. That's an individual intervention situation, not everybody. Okay. So I want you to know that I have not found an overall strategy for SEL in Marysville on their website anywhere. Somebody may find that that's true. But they do have something called the Wellness and Connectedness Program, and it does involve surveys. It sounds like some degree of SEL. It does specifically say that parents have the right to opt out. Okay, according to the Ohio Revised Code, folks, you have the right to examine everything. 3313.60, read the whole section under the Ohio Revised Code. Just Google it, it comes right up. You have the right to review materials, and you have the right to opt out for certain items in school. Well, surveys is one of those, questionnaires. And you have the right, it should be that you're opting in to these things. That's a more active role rather than opting out. And results of anything that your children are surveyed on should be given to you. You should ask, and it shall be given. Okay, give it to me, teacher. Sometimes teachers are very hesitant to give you much of information at all. Okay, let's talk about then one more. Next slide. We're going to talk about critical race theory. Now, the good news is that I understand that this is not a big factor in the Marysville schools, and that your administration is not going down this road at this point. What I want to do is, this is a good example of saying, even if you hear, oh, we're not going that direction, we need to support those good decisions and make sure that when teachers and administrators are doing the right thing and resisting the pressure from outside, that we thank them and that we give them that support and continue to monitor that, because the pressure is enormous from the teachers' unions, from the other educational associations, American School Counselor Association, from all of the activist groups, all the vendor people out there, from various political parties, to go down the road of these agendas. We need to support where good stuff is happening. And then we need to try to change it where it's not. So let's just go through this pretty quickly. What is CRT? Critical race theory is being taught in schools. It's often in history lessons. It's often in literature. The goal and the whole angle of critical race theory, the philosophy is, and if you want to know what critical race theory is in practice, the Black Lives Matter organization, not that sentiment is fine. You know, it does imply some things like great neglect and that we haven't thought that. But the organization itself has some problems. They're heavy-duty Marxist group that wants to divide and stir things up and pit people against each other. So what's happening is that now you have there are numerous teaching tools, books for even elementary grade kids, but older kids as well, that say that America has never changed. America is still full of white privilege, kind of needs to be dismantled, and that there's two groups of people of color, white people. White people are oppressors. People of color are oppressed and always victims. And a lot of people of color are saying, are you kidding me? You're telling my child that he's always going to be a victim because of the color of his skin? We have a board member at Protect Ohio Children that said that on one of my radio shows, is that no way, you're not going to tell my child that. It's patronizing, it's insulting. It also divides people. So you've got Megan and Aaron, seven-year-old girlfriends. One is a girl of color, one is a girl who's white. Now, Aaron, who's the girl of color, let's just say this, now is supposed to look at Megan, her little friend, and she never even noticed her skin color before, with suspicion. She's white. She's an oppressor of you. This is ridiculous. It's ridiculous. But that's the kind of stuff you're going to be getting, and we continue to get reports about this. Okay, so it's essentially Marxism. Instead of worker classes, we're using race classes. We don't need to go down this road, and we don't want our children to go down this road. Instead of, the standard of Martin Luther King, that we are the best thing, and this is a Christian belief, judge people based on the content of their character, not the color of their skin. This equity does not mean that in the new critical race theory influenced racial move. Equity means if you see something from a person of color, you have to completely reframe the system so that they are brought up equal to everyone else. This is Marxism, folks. This is Marxism. So, no, they don't really like Martin Luther King, and when you dig into this. And the problem is that many of the progressive, especially the younger people, do not get that. They think that this is just revitalized civil rights movement, and anybody against it is automatically racist. No, we're against it because it is not what Martin Luther King said. It is not Christian. God judges not by appearances, but the heart, right? That's what we stand for. So, and the other thing is that this idea that we're a systemically racist country is not borne out by easy observation nor polling. A Gallup poll a year ago asked the question of Americans who was okay and acceptable to them biracial marriage. Anybody have a guess as to what the answer was? 94%. 94%. That's pretty close to 100%. We are not a racially, by and large, with exceptions of incidents here and there, we're not a racially intolerant country. We don't deserve the idea of, the person that was the alcoholic, 20 years ago, but has been sober for 20 years. You don't go back and tell them, you're never going to be anything but an alcoholic or a druggie. We used to be a racially segregated and intolerant nation. We are not, by and large, now. That's why our southern border, everyone wants to come here, legally or illegally, because we're about the most tolerant nation in the world. Again, we have things to fix, but overall, that's where we are. So we should not put up with this in our schools. So, next slide. But we get this kind of stuff all over the place. We get the political agendas. Dublin School, there's a fourth grade teacher in Dublin School. She has this on her Google page. She's displaying the Black Lives Matter logo along with, and this is what I'm going to talk about in a minute, the joined arms between the different agendas. They're all in solidarity with each other. So the other, you can't quite see it, but it's International Non-Binary Day, okay, for fourth graders. We're getting into this. So some of this stuff is being sold to kids in schools. Marysville is not far down this road, but I can tell you that Dublin, Hilliard, I'll give you a few more examples if we have time, Worthington, Olentangy are far down these roads, okay? The other thing is that you may have heard, next slide, that so parents started showing up at school board meetings in various places, even in Ohio. A year and a half ago, we started to discover some of these materials in schools, complaining about critical race theory influenced lessons. And within a month, the talking points for all the mainstream media was, well, parents are showing up at meetings, but they don't really know. CRT is not being taught in schools. That's a graduate level course, and that's, the law schools are teaching that. No, it's being taught in schools, and it's the influence lessons. Yes, you won't have kids say, I'm going to my CRT class now. That doesn't happen. But what does happen is it will come into literature, it will come into history, and it's these kinds of principles that are not what was racial equality principles that we all have absorbed over the last 50 and 60 years. So this happened, the talking point was CRT is not being taught in schools. The National Education Association, the teachers' unions, and if you want to learn a lot about them, go on my website and use the search bar and go NEA or OEA, Ohio Education Association. Teachers' unions, I can't say enough. I mean, I'm going to say something against people here. I can't say enough bad things about the influence of the teachers' unions. They're routinely radical in their thinking, and they're not focused on education. They're focused on far left-wing politics. They have been promoting some aspect of CRT influenced lessons for years and years and years and years. Okay. Last summer in 2021, they passed a resolution that supported this. This resolution you can read on the board. That they're going to even, put people out there to come up against anti-CRT rhetoric. And they listed all these things that they're going to provide the already created study that critiques empire, white supremacy, anti-blackness, anti-indigeneity, racism, patriarchy, cis-heteropatriarchy, capitalism, ableism, all the other things. They're saying we're not going to let you promote all this. That's part of the, again, American heritage that as they see it. Problem was, and people said to them, somebody must have said to them, what are you doing? This is not our talking point. Our talking point is there's no CRT in schools. You're just saying you're promoting CRT. This went down from their website within 1 week. And luckily, a lot of people watched the 2.9 million member NEA in their annual meeting, and so a lot of people captured this. It was hilarious. They were caught in a huge lie, a narrative that is flat out easy to disprove. They've been promoting this for years. But anyway, so one more slide. Then we had another thing that influenced schools. So this is you're going to see this trickle down because it started at the Ohio State Board of Education in 2020. The Ohio State Board of Education passed an equity resolution that equity was the #1 standard in the Ohio Strategic Plan. Should that be the #1 goal of schools? Equity? I mean, equality is out there and it's certainly good. Again, academics, let's get back in our lane. So this resolution decried the white supremacy culture, hate speech, and hate crimes in Ohio schools and called for a top-to-bottom review of the schools. Well, the good thing is that they had so much pushback that first they tried to shut down commentary on this subject anymore, and then by the next year, a little over a year, they rescinded that resolution and passed instead one that says, this is the Ohio State Board of Education. The board condemns any standards, curricula that seek to divide or ascribe circumstances or qualities such as collective guilt, which is part of CRT's lesson or message, moral deficiency, or racial bias to a whole race or group of people. So that's the good news. So one of the other things that's happened, and I started observing this 20-some years ago, that there was starting to be a move to push homosexuality, the acceptance of homosexuality, and not back then, but in the last 10 years, certainly in the last 5 years, gender confusion to our children, and link arms with the racial issue, trying to make the case and create a platform that says that people are born this way. Okay, and that largely has been bought by a whole range of folks, lots and lots of folks. The only holdouts on that, as a demographic group, are people of faith, largely biblically based Christians. And there are a few other people that actually read the research, because there is no evidence that anyone is born this way. No evidence that the research has fallen flat. That's why they don't talk about it anymore. They don't want to debate anything, but they just are assuming. So you're going to see all these references to LGBTQ youth and the support of this, as if this is an intrinsically unalterable identifier for some people, either adults or now children. It is not. These are behaviors and identities which God has told us are wrong, are sinful, and where people can change. I have many, many, many people that I have known over the last 25 years, and still many as well, who are former homosexuals and formerly gender confused. There are no ex-African Americans. There are plenty of former homosexuals and former transgenders. Let me give you a couple great websites for those who want to explore being changed. Or you have a relative or a close friend. Sex Change Regret, Walt Heyer, he's a man who did all the surgery and lived as a woman for 8 years. He's been back for a number of years as a restored man, and no longer posing as a woman. The Changed Movement.com. This is both people coming out of homosexuality and out of the gender issue. And I've had people on my radio show as well. Parents are very concerned about the growing LGBTQ presence in our schools. The explicit homosexual sex ed, which I did not mention the fact that it's not just the condom demonstrations. Some of the sex ed is quite graphic, and there should be an obscenity problem with according to Ohio law. Ohio law does not allow for prosecuting schools and educational institutions for obscenity. Did you know that? We're one of the 44 states that have that exemption. So you can't bring that suit against a school. Those laws were passed back when there was presumed to be better judgment among publishers, sex educators, and so on. That judgment is kind of gone. So let's have the next slide. So the problem is we have, with the push from so many activist groups and linking arms with the racial issue, there's so much promotion that the youth culture, the LGBTQ youth culture, and I'm using that phrase just to cover the whole landscape quickly, it's their phrase, is exploding. People that are identifying in those identities. And it's because of online promotion, social contagion is ramping up a lot of this, especially teen girls that are all of a sudden deciding they want to be boys. This is, the numbers are going out the roof. Diversity, equity, and inclusion implies this, that if you don't, in your school or even your workplace, DEI is in the workplace, right? It's in banks, it's kind of everywhere. If you don't embrace these identities and behaviors and decide that people were born this way and they should just do this, even with kids, that there's something wrong with you, you are like a racist, you are like the Ku Klux Klan. Every school has a gay straight alliance, or sometimes it's now called the Genders and Sexualities Alliance, a GSA. Marysville has one, at least one. I don't know if they have one in the middle schools or intermediate school. I hope not, but most high schools and middle schools in the country now have these. They're becoming on-site activist training grounds for misinformation and for fast-tracking kids into these lifestyles. Well, this particular situation, okay, I just took a tour through the heartbreak of the incredibly damaging YouTube community selling transition to our children as if it just goes so smoothly. You want to be you're a girl and you were born in the wrong sex body, you want to be a boy, just start taking your testosterone and watch me. So this girl documented her, I'm pointing up there, I'll point up here, her body changes from several years after taking testosterone. Over 31 million views when I looked at this YouTube. And there's YouTube after TikTok video. They're getting one side at school, and if they have any questions about themselves at all, and it's the more troubled kids, the ones that are already struggling, that will often be the ones that are drawn to this. Maybe this is my problem. Or it could just be an adolescent that's having regular adolescent issues. I asked this question this morning. Did anybody in here have a trauma-free upbringing and adolescence? Yeah, I didn't think so. I did not either. Imagine if this had been your option out there. There might have been times when you might have decided, as a girl or as a boy, you don't want to go forward into manhood. You don't want to go forward into womanhood. You want to escape, and it can be done. It can be done safely. There's surgery. There's drugs. Well, no, the complications are awful. Well, anyway, next slide. Because of the incessant promotion, the number of people who are identifying as one of these identities has doubled in the last 10 years, and that's in the population at large. It gets even more, even greater among certain levels of the millennials, the Gen Z. Among teens, it's about 15 to 20% if you believe I shouldn't open up this can of worms. If you believe the Centers for Disease Control, but lots of chuckles on that one. But they've been doing this for a long time, pre-COVID, and all of their deception. What possible deception about that? I don't know. I really haven't spent as much time because I'm too busy looking at these horrors. I don't have time for new horrors in my life. So this is called the Youth Risk Behavior Survey, and I think it's the same one. There's a survey in Ohio called OYES, which surveys supposedly anonymously, but all kids on all these range of, it's everything, all the sexuality behaviors. Have you, how many people have you had, ninth graders? How many sexual partners have you had? It is not just surveys, but it normalizes these behaviors. But it will also, to be fair, it does talk about drug use, diet and exercise, all kinds of other things. They're trying to get a risk assessment. But in that survey, 15 to 20% of kids identify as gay, lesbian, bisexual, or unsure. And that's what happens when you promote something and it is not inborn. You get impressionable children. Guess what? They're impressionable. And we're seeing the horrendous fruits of that. I believe, because these same CDC surveys also show on the rates of suicide and substance use and depression and anxiety, the correlation between the kids who identify as gay, lesbian, bisexual, or unsure, and higher risk factors, guess what it is? There's a high correlation between the two. The non-heterosexual identifying kids are at much higher risk for very serious, according to these surveys, risky behavior. And so what would happen if we did not promote these? What if we just said, let's go back to believing that billboard that's on the 33. Matrimony is one man and one woman. It's just so simple and so sweet. And then kids that need help, we're here to help. The Christian church has been here to help. We should not be here to affirm them in any of this. Amen? Okay, so where am I here? So one other thing that happens, next slide, is that the homosexual community and their networks of activists that are pushing this and stimulating this and all this, the GSA network is a big one. They are, what they say, a network of all these clubs around the country. There is an Ohio GSA network branch of this, and what this GSA network is, I don't know if you followed Christopher Rufo. He's the writer who first started writing about critical race theory, influenced lessons. Well, now he's kind of reporting on all these other radical agendas, how they're all linking arms in solidarity. Well, he wrote this about the GSA network, that you get a heavy dose of the whole progressive agenda when these kids go to these activist groups and are influenced by this. Here's what he wrote. The GSA network's ideology follows the basic framework of radical gender theory. This is it. White European men created an oppressive system based on capitalism, white supremacy, and heteronormativity. That is, the promotion of heterosexuality. Oh, that's horrible. The male-female binary, that there are two sexes, also horrible. And bourgeois family norms. In order to fight back racial and sexual minorities, this is the GSA Network's idea, must unite under the banner of intersectionality, another word our kids are getting, and dismantle the interlocking systems of oppression. So heterosexuality and being, the white majority, America, Western civilization in general, and males, because males are in there too, all oppressive. Capitalism, all oppressors. And our kids are learning how to think of these as oppressors. This is poison. You're learning how to hate your homeland, hate your parents, hate your heritage, hate your body. Something needs to happen that's different. Well, it's not just in school, however. Let's take a trip outside school where this is being promoted. And this is where it gets extreme. It's already extremely disturbing. Let's look at the next slide. There are in almost every major metropolitan area now groups that are oriented toward homosexuality and gender confusion in the community at large. They're drop-in centers, and they're usually kids 12 to 20 or so. Well, here's the Columbus one, the Kaleidoscope Youth Center in Columbus, which is also where the Ohio GSA network meets. So the on-school homosexual clubs go and they meet down there. Well, it's a drop-in center because if you can find your way there and you're 12 years old or 13 years old without your parents knowing, no parental notice or permission is needed. And you're socializing and mixing with older teens and college-age students and volunteers, all of whom are interested in the LGBTQ behaviors and lifestyle. Does this sound like a recipe for some problems? What happens at Kaleidoscope stays at Kaleidoscope is my philosophy. Look at this. Look at this is from their website, what we do. 3 boys, young teen boys, they just happen to be of color too. That's always an extra thing they put in there just to draw that population in. Nuzzling together. They're selling sex. They may say they're selling a lifestyle and identity and safety. It quickly gets to sex and explicit sex in almost all these groups. So in Marysville, I was told, and then so I looked up, MosaicU.org has a community group. Okay, their mental health. Can you have the next slide then? The Mental Health and Recovery Board of Union County. It's for at-risk youth, and so if you look, and you won't be able to see, maybe you can, up there in the right-hand corner in the graphic is LGBTQIA+. So they have a special place where you can click on there because they are given money by the feds, the state, whatever, to be supportive of these kids that are labeled this, again, this label, as if this is, you're inevitably going to be one of these behaviors or identities. And of course, that's the first lie. And then, go to the next slide then. Let's see. Oh, the other thing, when you look on their website, you will find that they are all about social and emotional wellness. So you get the same thing in the community at large that the schools are focusing on with federal money. So you get that they have a group for youth as well. It is the Under the Rainbow Art Club for kids 13 to 18 to do an art project. I would like to ask the question, are parents notified? Because they aren't with the Kaleidoscope, and that's been the general operative of most of these community-based groups. Because, in case you haven't gotten the message, parents are the enemy. Parents are, there's automatic suspicion when there's a child or teen interested in homosexuality or gender deviance. No, parents are the enemy. because a parent might not approve. And then they would be prohibiting the child from their sexual rights and from being who they are. The other thing that Mosaic does, if you go on their website, they have links to books recommended by GLSEN, the Gay, Lesbian, and Straight Education Network, another longtime activist group. I've written about them. They are, I believe, a child corruption group. Their books are routinely, of course, they always are positive about these behaviors and identities, but they are selling these things to children, and they are often quite obscene when you get into the books for teens. They also have a link to the Trevor Project. Watch for this coming up in any of your school systems. It is a very, very large, well-funded website. Trevor Project started out as a suicide hotline and counseling. They still do that on the issues of homosexuality and gender confusion. The problem is they will never, they're committed to this agenda. They will never counsel anybody away from that. And they also, right on the Trevor Project, you could quickly go to Trevor Space and a whole range of unsupervised chat rooms, which is extremely dangerous. I have a friend out in California who's written on, I think it's the Daily Caller, she's written a whole range of exposés on what she found the more she got into these chat rooms and how loose they are. Adults, teens interacting. There's no supervision. So that's Mosaic. Again, you go a couple of links into almost all this stuff with the homosexuality thing with kids, and you're right into obscenity, you're right into high risk, you're right into danger, you're right into youth being involved in high risk sexual behavior. All the time they will say that they're supporting kids. This is very disturbing. Okay, next slide. The other thing is we've got the LGBTQ themed books at school. You've probably seen many of the controversies. I have a lot on my website about this. Please go to there, and I won't spend a lot of time on this. Grade school books don't get very obscene. They're just, again, selling the idea that little kids can change. So you have books like I'm Not a Girl, Jacob's New Dress, Julian is a Mermaid, My Princess Boy, and on and on and on and on. And the one I will show you now is, well, then also the older ones are pornographic. They're just flat out riddled with pornography because nobody's keeping the publishers in line, and they make money on obscenity. So much of it comes down to money. Okay, the next one. This was given to me as on display in a Marysville first grade class. The book All Are Welcome, which has racially diverse people on the front cover. Now let's go. Yeah, right. I'm sorry. I'm watching the slide wrongly. Never mind. We're good. And that's fine. And then you go in and you see two men walking their children to school, then two women, and one of the women seems to be pregnant. Now, I don't know how this book is used. I can't vouch for that. If somebody knows, let me know. But this is normalizing this behavior. That this is, again, you should accept this because it's just like race. And it's inborn, and there's nothing you can do about it. A big lie. It's not true. And from a Christian standpoint, there's sin issues involved. So I just was putting this together, and then I read that there's a lawsuit over this exact book in the state of Georgia. A mother of 3 boys complained about this book being used in her son's class, and she's also a substitute teacher in that same school. Because of her complaint for her own child, and she just said, I didn't say don't use the book. I just said, can we just take my son out while you're doing that? And she was fired from her substitute teaching job in Georgia. This wasn't Atlanta either. Alliance Defending Freedom is defending her, so that's a good thing. So the other thing we're getting, and next slide, pronoun, I call it tyranny, where all of a sudden, we're seeing, I've got, reports in Hilliard, reports in Olentangy, reports in Dublin, that entire classes are being told to stand up and you must declare your pronouns. This is like a backhanded loyalty pledge to this agenda. Kids that believe in male-female binary and have registered, and their parents have registered them when they started school, filling out the form, checking M or F, and they should not have to declare their pronouns. No one should have to declare their pronouns. So this is being sold. Okay, let me just tell you, I mentioned Kaleidoscope, the youth group in Columbus. Next door, sort of next door, Hilliard, it's kind of next door to you. Last spring, a member of the staff of Kaleidoscope spent not one but 2 different days providing teacher training to the Hilliard staff and teachers, and went through all of the things that you are supposed to do with pronouns now, all of the lexicon of the LGBTQ issue, and wrapped up by saying, if a child or teen comes to you and says that they would like to be dress and appear and be called other pronouns and another name, she said, I've been asked, should parents be notified? Not if the child doesn't want you to. You should not out a child. In other words, keep secrecy for parents, because parents are the enemy in some of these minds. If there's even the chance that a parent might disapprove, they will say, you're hurting children. This is an extremely rare situation, and if a person in school has valid and credible evidence that there is abuse going on in a home, they are mandatory reporters. Call child services. Otherwise, honor parents' rights to know about serious issues with their children. But the thing that is even more chilling after we read that, this is quickly becoming the standard best practice throughout schools. We know that it's not just Hilliard, it's Dublin, it's Olentangy, it's Parma. Is it happening in Marysville? Maybe happening in Marysville. The reason the American School Counselors Association, this is their standard now. It's also part of the new changes to Title IX that the Biden administration wants to put on all schools and change the definitions of sex and bring in the whole array of this gender ideology. I'll talk more about that in the questions and answers when we have time. Have people handed out the questions and answers? We're going to write down questions and answers. I'll be done here in a bit. Yeah, when you're past some of these cards, and just pass them down the aisle if you would. So turn those in by the end. And I'll spend more time on Title IX because I just spent a week down, kind of monitoring it at the Ohio State Board of Education on a resolution down there to try to stop this. But it would mandate pronoun issues in school, and it would mandate, and no law has been passed to authorize this. This is just coming from the federal Department of Education, would mandate also that children, their sexual and gender behavior be kept secret from their parents if they want. So, okay, next slide. So this is a risk to children. Selling this idea of changing your gender is horrendous. There is no research backing this up. There is opinion, and there's sloppy research, which just now, finally, people are finding out how sloppy the research, the flimsy, low sample size research has been on this. And we're behind in the U.S. The UK is backing off gender treatments of children. Sweden is, and Finland is, because they're finding it either is not beneficial or in some cases, and we know that this is the case, is harmful. And the suicide rate does not increase if you don't treat them. It's the opposite. 19 times higher suicide rate among those who go ahead and transition or attempt to transition into the other sex as they go on. And that's a huge study from Sweden. So what happens, the progression here is that The normal progression of puberty is blocked by drugs. This is, if a child shows up now, almost 100% of the time, the recommendation is affirm, quote unquote, this child in their true gender immediately, and then start them down this road, so that you block the natural progression of puberty. And what was happening for the last 5 or 6 years, when this really started being promoted, is that people kept claiming it's fully reversible. Now finding out, oh, whoops, guess what? Not fully reversible. You have bone density problems, brain maturation problems that you can never recover. But they try to slow down puberty so the child has apparently time to decide, but it's almost 100% of the time. In so many situations that counselors are reporting, the child goes ahead and goes to the next step, which is to socially transition, that is, new name, new clothes, new pronouns, and to go then, when they get to 12, 13, to start the opposite sex hormones. And then, as soon as they can, if they continue to go this, they get healthy body parts amputated. So girls are having breasts removed at 15 in some parts of the country. We hear here in Ohio that it's happening, but on the West Coast, it's happening at 13. And there's a move to allow boys to be castrated before they reach age 18. So this is horrendous. And the number of detransitioners, people that regret this in their early 20s, is exploding. And that's not even considering the pool of people that are being developed right now that are going through all this huge influx right now. That's going to be massive. I think lawsuits are coming, malpractice suits. Hopefully we will regain our sanity on this. So let's go to the next slide. So the other thing is that Matt Walsh, if you've ever followed him, he just did a big expose on Vanderbilt's gender clinic for children that he wrote this. Vanderbilt opened its trans clinic in 2018. During a lecture the same year, Dr. Shane Taylor explained how she convinced Nashville to get into the gender transition game. And I think that's the Nashville Children's Hospital there. She emphasized that it's a big money maker, especially because the surgeries require a lot of follow-up. In the Epic Times this week, there was an article following up on that right now, transgender treatments and surgeries are a $2.1 billion business and expected to explode to $5 billion by 2030. So it's money. All this ideology, well, it's ideology for some people. For some people, it's just money. So the good news is that Vanderbilt, after this expose, put a pause on their gender treatment for children. That's the good news. We can make a difference. Exposing this shows people, because people know there's way more people on our side on this who have common sense about male and female than there are pushing this. But the powers that be pushing this are pretty powerful. Okay, so let's talk about a little bit, what does Christianity teach? Let's just back all this up with a Christian worldview. Let's just revisit the fact that homosexuality is still a sin. It is a grave sin named in both the Old and the New Testaments. And this belief lines up with the marriage and family model and throughout the rest of scriptures. There is no place where homosexuality is portrayed positively anywhere in scripture, nor gender change. And in fact, in Deuteronomy, it's at 22:5, even cross-dressing is considered to be detestable to the Lord. So you can imagine what surgeries and all this is. And the reason is, next slide, well, there's many reasons. I mean, we're not going to pretend to get into God's mind. So let's look at what God has shown us. Jesus talks about marriage and gender. Matthew 19, also in Mark 10. Have you not read that he who made them at the beginning made them male and female, not male until you find out you were born in the wrong sex body and you get the appropriate corrective surgery. No, you're male or female. And for this reason, a man shall leave his father and mother. What's missing there? Not father and father, not mother and mother. And Be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh, anatomically, spiritually, socially, as God designed. We must stand on this truth, folks. We must stand on this truth. So the next slide. So what can we do? Okay, there are 4, possibly one more I might add, critical bills down at the Ohio State House addressing these things. I've been involved in some of these. I've testified on 327 to ban critical race theory type teaching. None of these are going to see any action before the election because the politicians are all tied up. But these are all good bills from my standpoint. And there's one more, House Bill 722, on guaranteeing parental rights and trying to stopgap this move toward privacy behind the scenes on your children. So that would be a good one, House Bill 722. So you can find out more on any of this on our website and also from me if you just want to contact me. What else can we do? The biggest thing we can do, of course, is start everything with prayer and reading and studying the Word. If we want a Christian worldview in anything, we need to understand what God has taught us and understand it thoroughly. That's when it's like they teach the counterfeiters. My husband he uses this in a speech. Don't you use this in a speech about how do you teach somebody to recognize counterfeit money? They study the authentic one inside and out and inside and out. That's why you know the phony right away. That's what we need to be teaching our children. We need to be grounding them in all of this. We need to research people to vote, even the school board people. Sometimes that information is hard to get, but you can find out a lot on Facebook, if you're on Facebook, or on Google or any search engine, about what they really believe and who their associations are. But if any of you are thinking that you might want to run for school board, that would be great. Think about that. Some people are gifted that way. As I said this morning, that would not be me. That would not be me. I would be sitting there with steam coming out my ears. But some people have that demeanor of, sitting calmly and listening to sometimes very wonderful testimony, sometimes very inane things, sometimes tedium. Some people are gifted with that. God has gifted each of us. So if you're feeling called, think about that. Then prepare our kids. Teach them about true racial equality. We're all one race. It's all just personal appearance. There is no skin color issue. You're blonde, you have dark skin. Who cares? We are all God's people. And that's the Martin Luther King standard, which this culture has, despite what is being said, by and large bought, with problems here and there, but we can fix those. Teach them about sin, sexual sin. Teach them about babies, that God loves babies. It's not okay to just destroy the fruit of the womb. And prepare them and ourselves and our hearts to stand strong with the persecution that may be coming and is here. This is something we have to ready ourselves for. I thank you so much for listening, and we'll do questions now. Thank you so much.